The same thing, though, is true about good messages. A good message, just as a bad message does not harm you, just by the mere fact that that you see it, a good message, good influence, does not help you by the mere fact that you have seen it. This time we'll use an example of a boy after school and he wants to play some soccer. And he has a soccer ball and he goes in to see his friend, and his friend is sitting in class and he is reading the Quran. And he says to his friend, "Hey, come on, quit reading the Quran, let's go out and kick the soccer ball around." And his friend says, "No, I like to play soccer, but reading the Quran is very important to me. I'd much rather do that than play soccer." So you'd have to say that would be considered a good influence, right? But what if with his inner speech the boy says, "Wow, what a loser my friend is." And he says, "I can't believe someone would rather read the Quran than play soccer." And he says, I think I might drop him as a friend. I don't want friends that are so super religious. So here he has followed a good message by saying negative things about the good message. With his inner speech, he has taken away the power of the good message to move him toward Allah, and has made it a situation that actually takes him away from Allah and moves him towards Shaitan. But just as in the other example, he could have thought to himself, "Wow, my friend is right. Reading the Quran is more important than playing soccer." And he says, "I'm really lucky to have a friend like him, who's a good example to me, a good Islamic example to me." And he says, I should really read the Quran, do more Quran reading and less soccer playing." So if he said this after that good message, then with his inner speech he has followed a good message by positive things. It increases its power to move him in a positive direction. So Allah has blessed us with the opportunity to use this inner speech, which, remember, comes from the time when Allah taught Adam the names of things and gave him a symbolic language, gave him free will and made him Khalifa. Allah also gave us the opportunity to use that inner speech to stop the effect of bad influences and to increase the effect of good influences. So no matter whether from society you get good messages or from society you get bad messages, you can always make positive spiritual growth by what you do with your inner speech. Now this is a very important thing for children to know. Basically, we don't look at the world like this, and we do what is called blow with the wind. And a leaf in the wind, it blows whichever way the wind goes, right? Most people, their lives go whichever way the influences from society go. And so you can teach children to be resistant to negative influence. Additionally, remember I said earlier about the black spot on the heart, that you can use this as a tool to remove the black spot on the heart, or at least remove some of it, less of its size. I would say in today's world, all of us probably have some black spot on our heart. Actually, I have a black spot test. So it's a simple test, because at one of the schools where I was doing some teaching, one of the kids said, "How can you tell if you have a black spot on your heart?" So the test is, if you like anything Allah does not like, you have a black spot on your heart. If you don't like something Allah likes, you have a black spot on your heart. Simple test, but a very accurate one. Now, we go back to this teenage girl who was thinking Christina Aguilera looks so cool, dressed in skimpy clothes and wanted to dress that way herself. The fact that that girl said those things, where do those things come from? They come from the black spot on the heart, because these are the things that Allah does not like. She likes things Allah does not like. She expressed them with her inner speech. That inner speech came from the black spot on the heart. If she didn't have a black spot on the heart, she could have never thought those things. So, what she could have done Even if it was the girl who thought these things, she could have, after she said, Christina Aguilera looks so cool dressed skimpy, I'd like to dress like that, I'm going to dress like that someday. She could then say to herself immediately, wow, what am I saying? This is ridiculous. I want to be a good Muslim. I don't want to go against what Allah wants. I will never again think that dressing in a wrong manner is good, and I'll never want to dress that way. If she did that, part of that black spot from the heart, because she has taken away that part of the black spot that allowed her to like that particular thing that Allah didn't like. So this tool can then actually truly be used to lessen the black spot on the heart. And if somebody were to go through all of their likes and dislikes, and with sincerity, make your likes and dislikes consistent with what Allah wants in the world, if you could do that, which would be really difficult, you could actually, with your inner speech, totally remove the black spot from your heart. Not easy to do, but within our potential. Allah allows that potential. And how easy it is to teach 5-year-old kids can remember this easy, right? Because what do you say? You see a bad influence, you say something bad about it. You see a good influence, you say something good about it. Easy enough to remember for a 5-year-old, right? So you teach them this, that they are going to be living a life where they're having all of these influences that are shaping them step by step towards where they are going someday in their life. And those influences are either going to be good messages or bad messages. And to teach them enough, help their taqwa rise high enough and their knowledge of right and wrong be sufficient so they can make accurate judgment on what is a good message and what is a bad message. And then get them to commit as Allah's Khalifah, right? This is part of commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Every time a bad message comes in, say bad things about it. Say why you don't like it and why it is wrong. Every time a good message comes in, say good things about it. Say why you like it and why it is helpful and good for you. Now, do you think you can teach this to 5-year-old children? I think you can. Right? And for those of you who work with older children, they can understand this very well. And so they no longer have to just blow with the wind of the social influence. And it allows them to take control of their lives. One of the things I say to teens sometimes, I say to them, what? Do you like people to control your life or you like to control yourself? They say, no, I like to control myself. So I say, do you want to let the teenagers in America tell you what to do? They say, no. I say, well, why do you dress the way you do? Why do you turn your baseball cap around the other way? Because the American teenagers do. So you let them control your life. Then they start to think, oh, yes, I'm letting them control my life. And I say, who do you think is really a better judge? Somebody who is a good Muslim teenager or somebody who is a secular materialist teenager who thinks that sex, drugs, rock and roll is the right way of life? Who is going to make the best judgments? They say the Muslim teenager. So I said, don't you think you should be listening to yourself rather than to the American teens? And they say yes. Also, when we talk about cool means respected and thought well of, and it means what's called street credibility, street cred, having credibility on the street. And I say, think about, even before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, before he started receiving revelation, and when he was in Mecca, he was the most loved man in Mecca. Why was he the most loved man in Mecca? Because he was the most kind, the most honest, the most helpful, the most sincere, you name a good characteristic, and he showed it. So, because he was held in the highest esteem, and he was the best thought of person in all of Mecca, of course, he was the coolest man in Mecca. And it is okay to think of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as cool. Right? We normally don't use that word with Prophet Muhammad, but there is no reason not to. And who is cooler, Prophet Muhammad or David Beckham? You know, when put to them like that, they start to realize what really is cool. And so we say, who do you want to define cool for you? The American teenagers who have no idea what Allah says is right or wrong? Or should you and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, should you be the ones who decide? And Allah's teachings in Revelation, should they be the things that decide what is cool? Because cool is not, to dress in a hip-hop manner and to the point where bad has become good. And so they start to redefine their idea of cool. And then we teach them about using their inner speech to even resist peer pressure. So I hope that part is quite well understood, and you see how you can teach it to kids. And I hope you can see what a powerful tool it is, and how simple. You see, one of the things that's important, say for instance, because it is my belief, all these things that I'm telling you, they can be very helpful in both in teaching children to be better human beings, better Muslims, and learn better academically. But also, ultimately, these things have enough power to help change the world and make it a better place. But what if it was so complicated, I couldn't tell you in simple terms and you couldn't teach it to 5-year-olds? Then it wouldn't be nearly so useful. So part of the blessing that Allah has given us with knowledge like this is how really simple it is. When Allah said, I have made your religion easy for you, I think it is discussing concepts like this, that once we understand them, and we understand what Allah wants from us, and why He wants it, and how we can achieve it, it is really simple. And we are, huge problems. Why does evil exist in the world? Well, we discussed it, and we came up with a simple solution. How do you fix the problems of the world? We came up with a simple solution. How do you resist evil and increase good? There's a simple solution. All of them can be taught to children as young as 5 years old and maybe even younger. So this is this wonderful blessing and mercy that Allah has given us. And we need to, and also, once you understand this yourselves, of course, and if you accept that it is true, and it is highly likely that it is true, you are under a very heavy obligation to give it to others. Because if a Muslim knows something that is a benefit to the Ummah and withholds it from the Ummah, this is a great sin. So this is why it is very important to give this knowledge to those you teach. So maybe we can go to the highest level of this now. And what we will discuss is what actually takes place in this box. The Ruh, the Nafs, the Qalb, and the Aql. Now, in English, we use the word soul, and if we want to change the English word soul into an Arabic Islamic word, we cannot do it. There is not an exact word in Arabic to describe the word soul as it means in English. What soul means in English is the non-physical part of the human being. And as is often the case, they have oversimplified and they think the soul is one thing. Scholars have unfortunately tried to relate the word soul to one of these words. And the word most often related to soul, of course, is the Ruh. But I can tell you why the Ruh cannot possibly be the soul. I want to say the soul is the combined effect of these 4 non-physical aspects of the human being. Each one of these is a non-physical part of each of us. But they work in a combination with each other. And their combined working is the soul. The reason that the Ruh itself cannot be the soul. The Ruh is what is called a universal spirit. And this is the God consciousness I was talking about earlier. It gets placed within the child when the child is in the mother's womb and around 120 or so days. This Ruh, being a universal spirit, is identical in every human being. Also, the robe you are born with is the robe you will die with. The robe cannot be changed. It is the God consciousness placed within. There's no way to change God consciousness. God consciousness is the perfect knowledge of good and evil, the understanding of our relationship to Allah, the oneness of Allah, and Allah as our creator. Those are among the things that come with the robe. And the use of a few of Allah's attributes in some small degree of their power. All of that comes in the robe. But that cannot be changed. So, you could be the worst person in the whole world, right? I don't know who the worst person in the whole world is, but one of the top candidates would have to be U.S. President George Bush, right? But when he was born, George Bush was born with a perfect soul. The message is written in there. They have changed him into whoever he is today. But George Bush has a robe within him, and that robe is as perfect as anybody's robe. So since on Judgment Day, we are judged on whether we have perfected our soul, you can't perfect your robe because your robe starts perfect and it ends perfect. You can't change it. So obviously we will not be judged on our robe. Then we have the nafs. So since the robe cannot be changed, but it influences us, the arrow goes one way. It can influence us, but we cannot influence it. The nafs we could describe as the material desires. The nafs are essentially say to us, like anything you want, and if you like it, get and enjoy it. The nafs starts out very immoral. It basically says, if you see something you like, take it. Don't worry about anything else. But the nafs can be changed, so the nafs will have an arrow going both ways. The nafs can affect you, and the nafs can be affected. And of course, the nafs actually has 3 levels. Oops. Some scholars say 5, but in the Quran it's actually 3. And I'll name them somewhat differently, but close. When you come into the world, you come into the world with the lowest level of nafs. It's like an animal. Animals, they just do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. And that's what the nafs tells you to do. This is why little babies are very hard for us to deal with. Babies are like just a little ball of nafs. They want what they want, and they want it immediately. And they don't care about anything else. You could be lying there dying next to them, right? And if they are hungry, they want their food. That's all they care about. So that's the animal level nafs, which is still saying to you, just whatever you want, take it. Now, say for instance, you see a 2-year-old child who, as I was describing earlier, goes around and hits other kids, and if they see another child with a toy they like, just walk up and grab it, don't care. That child is acting at their animal level nafs. And as you get older, it becomes less and less pleasant to see a human being acting at the animal level nafs. So what Allah wants us to do is raise our nafs, or perfect our nafs, and move it up to the second level, which I call questioning. And what the questioning is where you start to ask yourself, by the way, you can only ask with the aql. Of these 4, the only one that uses inner speech is the aql, which is the intellectual aspect, which we'll talk about later. But the next highest level, the level you want to raise the nafs to first, is called questioning. And what you do is you still want what you want, but now you are not sure whether it is right to take it. So a child who sees a child with another toy and thinks, oh, I want that toy, I'll just go grab it. But then they think to themselves, well, yeah, I'd like to have it, but of course that child who has it already, he likes it too. And if I take it from him, he might feel upset. So should I really do that or not? And that is the questioning level of nafs. And of course, you want to raise the children from the animal level to the questioning level as quickly as possible. And I would say certainly by the time a child is 2 years old, the parents and the teachers should have be working with the child to help them move from the animal level to the questioning level. By 2 years old, you should be making that transition to the questioning level. And the highest level nofs is called satisfied. And what it means to be satisfied, for the nofs to be satisfied, is the basic desires now are completely satisfied with what Allah says is right. What Allah says is right is what you want. What Allah says is wrong is what you don't want. And you really feel that strongly. And that is when the nafs is satisfied. When there is no difference between what you want and what Allah wants. Then the nafs is satisfied. At that point, the nafs is considered perfected. And I would say by the time a child is 5 years old, hopefully you can help them start the movement from the questioning level nafs to the satisfied level nafs. And that is part of your job. It's a very direct part of your job as a teacher for children, which is to help them raise their level of nafs. It's one of the very critical aspects of your responsibilities as a teacher. And if any of you have ever met an adult who is still working at the animal level of nafs, it is really unpleasant. I mean, they are people who only care about themselves, have no feeling for anyone else. And not many people like them. And for children to be liked, they need to get away from that animal level as quickly as possible. So remember those ages, because they are quite appropriate ages, I think. By 2, you're trying to move them from the animal level to the questioning level. By 5, you're trying to help them begin the path from the questioning level to the satisfied level. But that may be a very long path. I mean, I'm sure many of us have probably not arrived there yet. So, but it is important to realize this is what is going on. If you have a child in your room, in your classroom, that basically is just always doing whatever they want to do, and they don't care what you say, and they don't care how it affects other people, you know that they are working at their animal level nafs. And the way to fix that problem is not just to stop the behavior, but it is to raise the level of nafs to a higher level so they won't want to do that wrong behavior. In our school, one of the things we are going to focus on is not just getting right behavior, but getting love of right behavior. See, you can get right behavior without the intent. Somebody, like say for instance, in prayer, you can say to a child, if you don't pray, I'm going to beat you severely. So the child prays so they don't get beaten. But Allah is not going to reward that prayer because they are not intending to pray for Allah for the right reason. They are praying for a wrong reason. And if you do a right action for a wrong reason, you don't get rewarded. So we need to teach the children to love what is right, not just to do what is right, but to love to do what is right. And once you love to do what is right, it is very easy to get children to do what is right. So the focus should not be on the behavior, but on the nafs. Then we have the qalb, which is the heart. And it is the qalb that has that that black spot. The qalb is called the organ of discernment. Discernment is an English word that means to choose between two things, to be able to see the difference between things. And the qalb is to see the difference between right and wrong. Now, and let me just say what the last one is. The aql is the intellectual part of the human being. And the aql is the only one that has inner speech. The ruh, the nafs, and the qalb, they all affect the They affect who you are, but they affect it without inner speech. To the degree their influence gets put into words, it gets put into words through the akal. So the nafs can get put in, the nafs cannot say inner speech, but the nafs can influence the akal, and the akal puts the feeling of the nafs into words. The connection of the soul to the body is through the akal. These three are placed, are within the human being, but they are not connected physically to the human being, and their place of existence is actually outside of physical existence. The akal arises from the actions of the neurons in the brain, but it is not the neurons in the brain. It is the interaction of technically photons of electromagnetic radiation, but we'll say light energy. It is the interaction of light energy between the neurons of the brain, and light exists outside of space and time. So this is also a non-physical aspect of the human being, but it is connected to the human being through the neurons in the brain. So that's where the soul connects to the physical body, through the akal. Now, the akal is also logical. Human beings are very logical. Matter of fact, human beings are virtually always logical. Now, hopefully, so far you think from my talk, you would think I'm a fairly reasonable person. But what if, every once in a while I'm giving my reasonable talk to you, I were to go like this. And then I get back and I start talking reasonably to you again, like that. You would think I was pretty strange, right? It doesn't seem logical to do what I'm doing. But if I was a paranoid schizophrenic having visual hallucinations of a fire-breathing dragon coming through that wall at me, it would be very logical for me to go like that, wouldn't it? So even though I have perceived my world wrongly, I am acting logically on that wrong perception. And that is why we need to fix the world view of people and put the right information in here. If you get wrong information put in here, you will act wrongly on that information. That's what I was saying earlier. The people who are taught, or like, if a lot of young Muslim girls see Christina Aguilera and think that's a cool way to dress, then that information gets written in here, and they act logically on that information, and the logical thing to do if that is the cool way to dress is to dress that way. So you have to put right information in here, because the akal is going to judge that information logically. And only if it judges right information will it come to the right conclusion. Then the qalb. When we are judged on Judgment Day, the non-physical aspect that we are judged on is actually going to be the qalb. The qalb is, well, it's the heart, but it can mean the physical heart, but it doesn't necessarily mean the physical heart. What it really means is the core of your being. The qalb is who you really, really are. So with children, you can tell by their behavior what is happening here. Are they listening to the rope? If you see somebody who is always doing what is right, you have a 5-year-old child, and they are just like almost perfect in every way. This means their nafs has already got at least to the questioning and maybe on its way to the satisfied level. It means they have very little black spot on their heart, and they can see the robe very clearly. And the robe and the qalb are giving good information to the akal to make judgments on, and they are doing the right thing. But if you see anything wrong within the child, you know that the qalb has a problem because there is a black spot, and you can tell what kind of thing it is because you see what they are doing. If it is a thing where it is about satisfying your needs and not caring about others, you know their problem is in the nafs. And you remember what I said earlier. When you want to change somebody, you have to change the way they think. Right? So if you have a child that, say for instance, is bound in their animal level nafs and hits other kids and grabs whatever they want from other people, and you want to change them, you have to change how they think. And it is the aql that does the thinking. So you want to, because you are then be part of their social influence, the only way to change the way people think is to write new messages in here that say the old messages are wrong, and powerfully enough to get them to listen to the new message and not the old message. Additionally, you also want to teach the children as soon as possible to use their inner speech to put those right messages in there. But in the beginning, you see, before the child has its aql working, the child cannot communicate. I mean, you're not born with inner speech, you're born with the potential for inner speech, but you need to learn language. So this is why it is important for children to learn language early and to learn language well. The better you have learned language, the better your aql can make judgments. If you don't have much language, you can't make many judgments. And that gives your nafs the opportunity to do whatever it wants, because you can't stop it with the logic of your aql because you don't have the words. By the way, it's always important to remember that children have two kinds of language. Children have what's called receptive language, and they have what's called expressive language. Expressive language is what the child can say, and receptive language is what the child can understand. And the receptive language, what the child can understand, is always far, far in advance of what the child can say. You may have a child who could only say 10 words, but they might be able to understand 200 or 300 words. But the important thing to remember is, until the child gets language, they can't use their aql. And until they can use their aql with language, they cannot understand the messages from the ruh. And also, the ruh does not speak in terms of inner speech to the aql. So this is why you as parents and teachers need to be putting many messages in there that are consistent with the messages the child would be receiving from the ruh. So basically, you need to tell them about Allah as the oneness of Allah as God. You need to tell them about Allah as their creator. You need to tell them about their responsibilities to Allah. You need to tell them what Allah has said is right and wrong. And then, when that is stored in their aql, they will be able, if they don't have a black spot on the heart, they'll be able to see those same messages are naturally within themselves in their fitrah. Because the fitrah comes through the ruh. I hope that wasn't too complicated. I hope you sort of understand this. That by knowing these things, you could know a whole lot about why the child is as the child is, and what kind of things to say to the child to change them. I mean, for example, it sounds now almost too simple to say, but if the child is working on its animal levels nafs and just is always going up and grabbing toys from other kids, and you have someone like that in your classroom. So you want to say things to them, right, to get them to think differently. Now, it is possible the thought has never crossed their mind about how they would feel if someone takes something from them. So, of course, I mean, I'm sure you already know to say this, but here's the reason why saying that works. You say to them, you just took that child's toy and they felt really bad and they cried. How would you feel if someone came up and took your toy? Would you like that? And they say no. See, now that is writing messages with their inner speech and from your social influence into their aql, and they have new information to make a judgment on. And so they are more likely to be moving toward the questioning level of nafs. where they say, okay, I want the toy, but how about how the child's going to feel? And then you can say to them, do you know that you like the other kids to like you, don't you? And they'll say, yeah. And they say, but you know, if you just go up and you hit people, and you go up and you take their toys, they're not going to like you. And so, because you want people to like you, you need to treat people in a nice way. And you say, you can see why, can't you? Or you understand, don't you? And you get them to understand, and then you have written a message into their consciousness, and they have, with their inner speech, written a message into their consciousness. And then later on, when the opportunity to take a toy comes again, they have new information in there that the Akal will make the judgment on, and ultimately that the Kal will make the discernment or the decision on what is right and wrong. Because a Kal that is really pure is going to refuse many of the requests from the Nafs. See, the Nafs is always, Allah made the Nafs. I mean, in the Quran, Allah says about the Nafs that you have within you a Nafs that will be attracted to evil. So the Nafs is not evil, but it is attracted to evil, and what it means by evil, it is attracted to the things of the material world at the expense of the spiritual world. And our goal is to be eventually attracted to the things of the spiritual world and not of the physical world. But it's important for our survival when we are little babies that we are very concerned with our material needs. But when you get older, we need to be concerned with our spiritual needs. So Allah puts these material desires within us, so we will get what we need to survive as an infant. But then we have to get away from that so we can survive successfully as an adult and prepare ourselves for Judgment Day with a pure soul. So always, you want to be, as a social influence to the children, you want to be writing as many messages you can in there that will be the same messages they get from the Ruh, so that the Akal will recognize those messages that are already in their fitra, in their natural state. And you want to write as many messages as possible in there to stop them acting at the animal level of nafs and to teach them to question the things that they want because of the animal level nafs, and to raise that level up as quickly as possible. So I hope you can see how that gives you some idea what kind of things to be saying to the children. And what you specifically say is then determined by the behaviors that they are doing. You know, if they are hitting, that's one, you talk about hitting when you're trying to change their nafs. If they're grabbing toys, you talk about grabbing toys when you're putting messages in there. So it tells you pretty much what kind of messages to put in there. But you always want to be writing as many messages in there as early as possible, which are essentially all the good Islamic truths that exist that you can put into the child's mind so the Akal can recognize them in the Ruh. And then if the child very early is recognizing the message from the Ruh and is questioning the nafs, they're going to probably not develop a much black spot on their heart. And they can end up starting quite pure and staying quite pure in their life. And that is the opportunity you can give them. So I mean, you have amazing power as teachers, you know, in children's lives. I mean, ultimately, it's a scary thing to think, but it could be you who decides whether the child ends up in hellfire or paradise, right? If you were to do a bad enough job in letting them go along this path and not helping them along that path, you never know what will be the thing in their life. But there are major points in the life, and the teacher is one of the major influences in a child's life. So I mean, you are of huge, huge importance. This is why you are deserving of huge respect from the children. And this is why in Islam, the teacher was held in I mean, such high respect. It was like that they were, well, I mean, the student would do virtually anything for the teacher. You know, and they would always like kiss the teacher's hand and consider the teacher to be, I don't know exactly where in the hierarchy. I mean, of course, Allah is number one in our love. Prophet Muhammad number 2, the mother number 3, the father number 4. Maybe the teacher is number 5. I don't know whether the list goes down that far. But I would say you would have to put the teacher at least at number 5. So, you know, this is why teaching is not like, it's not a job. I mean, it is a job in that you get paid for it, but teaching is really what would be called a sacred duty. You know, and it needs to be considered with that level of seriousness. Because you are actually determining who these children will be in their life and where they will end up on Judgment Day. You're not the sole determiner of it. And then also, can you imagine one of the benefits a teacher gets is for every child that you are a positive influence on, and every positive thing that child does as a Muslim in their life, you get reward for that. So if you in your life teach 1,000 children, you're getting the reward not only from your own good actions, but from the good actions of 1,000 children if you've been a positive influence on them. This is really wonderful to, you know, have that much reward on your balance on Judgment Day. Just one more thing about how the relationship between positive to negative, because sometimes, you know, when I'm telling parents and teachers that they should be positive, more positive and less negative with kids, they think just being a bit more positive is okay. But my suggestion is that the relationship between positive to negative be at a ratio of 350 to 1. 350 positive to balance 1 negative. Now, where would I get a number like this? Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said that anyone who knows 40 hadith is guaranteed paradise. Well, there's a lot more to it than that in what Prophet Muhammad meant, but the most famous 40 hadith are Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith. And one of Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith is about how Allah treats us in regard to right and wrong behavior. And Allah does not actually assign points, but I'll talk about it as points because that allows me to express it as a number. Now, what does Allah do if you intend to do something right? Does anyone know Nawawi's 40 hadith on this? If you intend to do something right, what's Allah give you? Gives you 1 positive. What if you go ahead and do that good thing that you intended to do? Allah multiplies that by 10 to 700. Now Allah can multiply it by anything He pleases, but according to Nawawi's 40 hadith, it's 10 to 700. And he did get this from hadith from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, what if you intend to do something wrong? What's Allah give? Nothing. What if you go ahead and do the wrong? So here, 0 plus 1 is 1. Here you can get anywhere from 1 to 700. The average of 1 to 700 is 350. Therefore, 350 to 1 ratio of positive to negative is the way Allah interacts with us. Now, I don't know that Allah really meant for us to, you know, look at it that way. But at least it is saying to us, give lots and lots and lots of positive and a little tiny bit of negative, because that is how Allah treats us. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was an example of perfection in human behavior, Prophet Muhammad, as far as we know, and we know a huge amount about his life, never once, not only never once hit a child, but never once said a harsh word to a child. So So Prophet Muhammad beat that ratio of 350 to 1 by many, many times. His ratio was actually technically, numerically, infinity to 0, using that formula, which was always good, never negative. But I think you can see the importance of lots and lots of positive and a little bit of negative. And you know, when you do this, several things. One, it is a lot of fun, right? Because it's not fun to have harsh and nasty with kids, but it is lots of fun to have pleasant, you know, discussions and interactions with them. And children respond so really well to positive. And positive builds motivation. It is. I remember one time a child who was 10 years old, but he was still in Standard 2 because equivalent of Standard 2, because he essentially couldn't read at all, and couldn't read any more than kindergarten level. And the teachers, they had a special education teacher who did some testing on him and said he had some sort of learning disability where he couldn't make visual discrimination or something like that. But when I talked to the child, I could tell he was very intelligent. He could describe to me the workings of a distributor on a car in great detail, for example. So, but he was, of course, very non-motivated to read, because here he is 10 years old and they're giving him kindergarten books to read, which are very boring and embarrassing, and he believes he can't read, and he's been told he can't read, and has no motivation to read. So, because we had an honest friendship in our relationship, I was able to convince him of the importance of reading and to motivate him to read. I mean, I won't go into all the detail of how I went through this process. It was a series of small steps in shaping. But the end point was, he ended up being able to gain in the last half of year 2 in school, learning to read up to a 5th grade level. So he essentially, in half a year in school, gained 5 years of reading ability because he got very, very motivated. So if you can motivate somebody sufficiently, they can do really many times what they normally will do. And honestly, most children in school are not very highly motivated. If they are motivated, they are often motivated towards negative behaviors rather than positive behaviors. And if you can direct all their motivation in a positive direction, then you can get lots and lots of good behavior out of it. And so what you really want to do, we call this directed positive influence. So in every part of their life it is positive. And the Khalifah method is so simple. I mean, if just put into a few words. You first teach them to be Khalifah of Allah. And that includes quite a bit of information, right? But you teach them to be Khalifah of Allah. And that means getting them to the point where they really love to be Khalifah. 2, you give lots and lots of reward, meaning kind social interaction, kind words and feelings and relationship, for good things that they do and good characteristics that they show. And 3, you set firm, reasonable rules for the children and enforce them consistently, a critical word here, consistently with kind discipline. An example of kind discipline is from the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the Prophet came upon a boy who was throwing rocks at these date palms and shaking. And the rocks were big enough, when it hit the trunk of the date palm, it would shake the tree enough some dates would fall down. But also it would put a hole in the bark and hurt the tree. So Prophet Muhammad said to the boy, whose trees are those? The boy named the man who owned the orchard. Prophet Muhammad said, no, they're not his trees. Those trees belong to Allah. And do you know, when you hit those trees with those rocks, you break the bark on the tree. That's like having a cut in your skin, and it allows disease to get in. And that tree could get sick and die. do you want to make Allah's tree get sick and die? I said, oh no. So Prophet Muhammad says, well, in the future, what would be best to do is wait until the dates get ripe, and then they will fall to the ground. This is the way Allah wants it to be, and then they'll be much sweeter, and they'll taste better, and the tree won't get hurt, and you won't have to do anything wrong. And he says, will you do that in the future? The boy says, yes. Prophet Muhammad said, oh, thank you, that's really nice. And he ruffled his hair, made a dua over him, and walked on. And this boy, who later became an important companion, remembered this all his life, see, and loved to do the right thing. But this was a case of discipline. Right? Discipline doesn't mean punishment. Discipline means getting people to correct wrong behavior in a consistent manner. So this is what we call kind discipline. And so that's basically the simple way to deal with kids. Teach them their Khalifa, give lots of reward for the good things, give them kind discipline for every wrong thing they do. So every influence upon them is a positive one. And then you teach them to use that concept I was talking about, where they use their inner speech to say bad things about the bad messages and good things about the good messages. And then with their inner speech, they're reinforcing only goodness. So they live a life of directed positive influence. Directed, meaning directed toward what Allah wants. Positive, meaning no negatives. And that's where all of their influences are. So they constantly live a life of progression towards paradise. So that's a quick overview of what the Khalifa method and knowledge is about. And I might say that because as a scientist, I like to take some data. So far, every time we have had a group of parents that we've been able to keep in contact with, and when we've asked on a survey the question, have you seen any positive changes in your children based on your use of the Khalifa method? So far, the result has been 100% in every survey we have done. Because to the degree we understand these rules of learning correctly, and we're pretty close. I mean, they're probably not perfect, but they're very close to right. To the degree we understand them correctly, this is the way Allah set up the world to be, to work in a lawful way. And it's like the laws of physics. If you have a lever and you put a certain amount of force, you get a certain amount of lift. That's guaranteed you by Allah. The same thing is true with using these learning techniques with children. You put in a certain amount of information into their consciousness according to some lawful manner, and you get a certain result. And that is guaranteed by Allah because Allah has made the universe in a lawful way. And that is why it works so well.